financial report. Here comes Vaughn to give that to you.
All right, our balance as of today is $21,988. Of that, we have $11,898 in our checking account, the balance and a certificate of deposit.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, is there any new business? Is there any old business? Okay, so the meeting is adjourned, and now Chuck Kuchar, on with the program.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to see this kind of a good turnout on a summer day. If it is a summer day, some of you might have started worrying about water and so forth, but anyhow, here we are. We have tried to, and I think we've succeeded really, in getting a combination of programs, things that maybe you never thought much about, maybe I never thought much about, and they make a really good story. So this is the kind of thing that I think we've been sort of working on. And also, let me say this, we had, of course, some real problems with the equipment last month, and nobody did anything dangerous like jumping off a cliff or anything, but maybe somebody thought of it. We are indeed, I began collecting information about projectors, and this is really an antique. When I got my paperwork out, I saw I bought that around 2006. Computer language, that's an antique. And so, the newer projectors, there are two good things about them, and one of them is they are much cheaper than what I had to pay. When I bought this and was thinking about buying it, I was standing in line back there somewhere, I don't recall why, and Sandy Begwinger's brother, Ron, was right behind me, and I said, I'm going to get a projector, and he said, what's it going to cost you? And I said, less than $1,000. And he said, you can't get one for I just bought one. Well, he was right. Now you can get a masterpiece for less than $1,000. So that's coming, and I think we may be able to then get you better pictures, better colors, better brightness, and even maybe some better controls on things. For example, newer projectors, you can put them on the table and adjust the lens so it can point almost anywhere. You don't have to steal somebody's cookie box and do this. So we're working on that. And so we do have some things coming up here. We have a meeting in September, and of course the first Monday is Labor Day. So it's September 12th, so we got kind of a break here. And the speaker is Greg Osterud. Did I say that right? We'll talk about women and family farming in the early 20th century New York. And we've done this before, but people find it very interesting, and there's a lot of your own stories and memories and so forth that we'll be doing in September. October, we have Dick Woodworth, who will have on display and talk about his presidential memorabilia ranging from 1824 to 2016. Boy, you're going to get an earful then. So it is. And let me say this, some of you may have an idea about speakers or programs that you would like to see. And we're very happy to hear about them, and maybe we can find some people who can do that. And that's always fun to do that. So at any rate, that's where we're going. Tonight, we have Roger Cook, who's the presenter, and Barbara Cook, who's working the computer. And so far, so good. Both from New Woodstock, and they're talking about the Belmont Works, powder works, that kind of thing, explosives kind of things. The factory was once the second largest in the nation, and the dates they're giving for that are 1888 and 1898. So, yeah, this no doubt surprised a lot of us, right? We had no idea this was happening. A lot of questions that Roger's going to cover. Why there? What was there that made this feasible? Why is it not there anymore? Things like that. I don't recall any wars happening during that time, but anyhow, we'll take a look at all of that. So, Roger, he didn't come tonight. He did come tonight.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, it's a little scary to stand here and see this many people because I'm not that good. Neither is the program. Nice to see some faces out there that I've known for a long time. Mrs. Edwards, who was my Sunday school teacher, so I'll try to do well. And so it is, it's, you know, thank you for inviting us to give this program. This, you know, particular program was something that we don't, this is the first time we've ever given it. We did it, you know, more for a historical marker. And I guess through Vaughn Skinner has gone by and seen the sign. And I don't know if he was instrumental in getting us here, but again, thank you very much. And I hope that we can stand up to, you know, the programs that you've had in the past. So, again, we'd like to thank you for having both my wife and here this evening to talk about the Belmont Powder Mill. The mill itself, for those that don't know, is located in what is called right at the base of Belmont Hill, which is East Road. If you were to go out into Woodstock towards Cazenovia, about 2 miles, you'll go across Chittenango Creek. And just past that, there's a farm there today on the right-hand side of the road, and that's where that mill is located, and that's the area that we'll be talking about. So if any of you travel that way, you can picture that in your mind. And, you know, we'll show you some maps later on in the program that kind of depict that area, but that's the area that we're speaking about. And it's, to me, it's always truly amazing that small communities like Fabius, DeRuyter, Georgetown, New Woodstock, places like that have such stories to tell. When you go back and the number of businesses that flourished and did all kinds of great things and even expanded, you know, outside of New York State into the country. Just last month, or 2 months ago, I guess, we had Matt Ertz from the Madison County Historical Department came and gave us gave our group a speech on the mills of Chittenango Creek, really from Mill Street in Cazenovia to the top of Chittenango Falls. And now what is pristine Cazenovia was really a hodgepodge of mills, 5-, 6-story buildings, steel piled, wood piled, all kinds of mess, and just, you know, many things. Well, there were a lot of farm implement companies that actually started out of the origins of being there. There were clocks put in churches around the world that started in Cazenovia. So, little small villages like yours, like ours in Woodstock, have really contributed a lot, whether in people or products or anything else, to that. So again, you know, Belmont Powder Mill was one of those little gems that existed for a short period of time, but contributed, and you'll see later on how it's contributed to companies that are big, big companies today. I have to say that once a college professor told me that the best talk was a short talk. But I have to say that my wife and I just returned from a trip to Ireland, and we were fortunate enough to climb the Blarney Castle and kiss the Blarney Stone. And of course, as legend has it, and you may know that by kissing the stone, that gives an individual the gift of a Blarney. Well, and you'll laugh because that can go both ways. That can mean that either this talk is going to be one of eloquence or it's going to be nonsense. And I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. So now I'd like to talk about the Belmont Powder Mill. Belmont Powder Mill existed from 1888 until 1898, a rather short period of time, but was rather active during that time. The origins of this program started in November of 2014 when the annual request for grant applications came out from the William C. Pomeroy Foundation. The New Woodstock Historical Society has participated in this program over the years, and we felt that the Belmont Powder Mill met the criteria for that year's submission. The grant requires a number of documented items to prove that the application is worthy of being accepted. We are fortunate that the Cazenovia Library has all the copies of previous Cazenovia Republicans digitized so that they're easily accessible for us to look up information that we needed. Also, R. Philip Hart, who was a Cazenovia resident and a historian, he wrote several articles that depicted the goings-on at the mill, which have helped greatly in providing information that we use. My wife and I somehow got in charge of trying to secure this grant. We've kind of passed it around to other members within the organization over the years, and it was our turn. So we were the ones that kind of put this all together. In February of 2015, the Society was awarded a grant by the Pomeroy Foundation for a New York State roadside historical marker. This marker was unveiled at a ceremony held on September 6, 2015 at the Millen family reunion. The property that the mill is located on was in the Millen family for the past 86 years and continues to operate today as a current dairy farm, and it's run by John and Mike Millen. The Millen family, I think if you go to, you'll see some of the existing members of the family. These are all brothers and sisters, descendants of the original owner, Joe. These folks came from Middle Europe and immigrated here along with some other families. If any of you remember Nick Zupan or Bill Zupan, who was in the gravel business, those folks, all knew each other, through various contacts in Eastern Europe. And they all came and settled in this area, which their families and descendants are still all here today. So it's quite a lineage that we have. And so it was great to do it at their family reunion and be able to unveil that plaque. Just some more pictures again of that. And there's, right here is Mr. Zupan for any of those that, he's a supervisor in the town of Cazenovia, and he came just for that unveiling. So before we start talking about the actual mill itself, I'd like to explain a little bit about how gunpowder works, how it's made, because that's important to this whole process. To begin with, without gunpowder, there would not have been a Belmont powder mill. I'd like to provide you with a brief history of gunpowder. An early form of gunpowder was invented in the 9th century in China. In the 11th century, the Chinese had an explosive called, and I'll probably butcher this, but it's called hao yao, which they used for fireworks and signals. They are believed to have shot solid fragments from a bamboo tube, which could be considered as the first gun, and I certainly hope they had it registered. In the 13th century, Roger Bacon, who maybe some of you are familiar with his teachings, he was a Franciscan friar, and he also a noted scholar. And he introduced to Europeans the first writings of how to make gunpowder from the teachings of the Chinese. Gunpowder is made with saltpeter, which is potassium nitrate, also called soda. They add charcoal and sulfur. Central New York area had enough of the raw products that could supply a mill so that gunpowder could be produced here. The saltpeter, in the first step of the process, is boiled in great big iron kettles and then cooled in vats where the saltpeter turned into white crystals that were made. Today, if you drive by the Millen farm, you'll see the barn sits way down below the road, but there's a two-car garage sitting up right near East Road. And if you look closely in the driveway, you'll see a bunch of old bricks that are in part of the driveway. That was one of the vats that was used to boil the saltpeter, one of the few remnants of the existing facility. The charcoal was made out of willow wood. We have a lot of willows that grow around here. We have a lot of wet areas. And willow wood supposedly was used because of its ability to burn and make good charcoal. It burned at just the right rate and was perfect for that use. The charcoal was then packed into metal cylinders that were approximately 2 inches in diameter and 5 to 6 feet long. They were then covered with a bunch of clay, wadded into the top, and set into furnaces, and they would roast them. And this process was known as distilling. The gas that was given off from that distilling process back in the 1800s was recaptured, much what we do today with wood-burning stoves, recaptured, put back in, and used as additional fuel to help, fuel the fire to bring that charcoal to its fruition. And so once the charcoal was formed, it was removed from these steel cylinders and it was pulverized into very small particles. Sulfur, which is the next step, could have come from a number of places as close as Massachusetts, and I'll get into a company that used to produce that pre-revolutionary time in a minute. Or the preferred place for the sulfur was either France or from Sicily, so they imported a lot of that particular item. Everything else could be produced here in New York State. The pulverized charcoal and sulfur are then combined by placing the ingredients into rotating wooden barrels. And the barrels would be filled with the charcoal, sulfur, and then a series of small zinc balls. And you say, well, why zinc balls? Zinc does not create sparks. Sparks, explosive stuff, they don't work together. So the zinc balls, and sometimes they use very small stone balls. And even today, you can go up into the hillsides along the mill and farm, and you can dig a lot of these little small balls out that were used as part of this process. They're still there. And so the zinc balls were probably about the size of a current day golf ball, and that's what they used. So all these things turning around inside this barrel just kept grinding and mixing everything together. The second step in the process was to combine the charcoal and sulfur mixture with soda and water. And this wet mass was then crushed by heavy rollers in a long wooden trough. This was a highly explosive mixture and needed to be closely watched by the staff. It needed to be kept at just the right wetness so as not to get dry and go boom. The powder was then tumbled again. Well, once this, mixture was kept in these troughs and pushed around, it was then made into what they call a wet cake or a powder cake. And this wet mass was taken to a press and it was formed into cakes and slabs. And then this was taken to a chipping machine and broken into very small pieces. The resulting powder was then sifted out, either placed outdoors, when the sun was shining and be able to dry naturally, or they would take it into a facility where they put it on trays, actually fed fires and fans, and it dried that powder out. Once the powder was sufficiently dry, it was tumbled again and they added graphite. The graphite made it easy to pour, and it also made it resistant to moisture, because the old adage, the guys in the Revolutionary War and everything about keep your powder dry, well, that was certainly a reason for that. The finished product, once it was done, they placed it into iron caskets, kegs, and of course, much easier to store those things, and they weren't going to break open and again get exposed to something that might explode that stuff. It was a very volatile product. Once they were in the iron kegs, there were magazines on the property that they would store them until they were ready to go to market. There were several grades of powder that were done. They could produce, what was known as a sporting powder, which today we would think of as, shooting clays, hunting, things of that nature. They would produce a grade for the military, for cannons, and, the bigger pieces of artillery that they used. And then the last were for blasting, like we still use today. People blow up things to, make holes bigger. So, having talked about how gunpowder was made, we'll get into the history of the Belmont Mill itself. The original owner of Belmont Mill was a gentleman by the name of Colonel John D. Griswold. It really is not, we're not sure where he originally came from, but he settled on Casanova as a place to start his business. He and his wife Laura moved to Casanova in 1886. They originally moved to the Cazenovia house, which was a hotel located, I believe, where the present-day Kinney's is located. And they spent a part of that year living there, searching out one. They wanted to look for a site for their mill that was appropriate. They also wanted to find a house that was becoming of an industrial giant such as Mr. Griswold. The home site was easier than the mill to find. They purchased a house on the southeast corner of Nickerson and Sullivan Streets in the village of Cazenovia for $5,000. The building is still there, and it currently serves as the office of the president of Cazenovia College. Today it's better known as Joy Hall. And it got that, you'll find out briefly where that name came from, why it wasn't Griswold Hall or something of that nature. So, I mean, again, that house hasn't changed much on the outside from what it was, you know, at the turn of the 19th century. In July of 1887, Colonel Griswold bought 45 acres of land on Chittenango Creek at the Belmont Bridge. And he bought it from Joseph Shattuck for a mere $1,500. The search for this site obviously took, you know, as I said, about a year, because the requirements for a site like that have to have certain qualities. It's got to be remote enough from any settlements so that if there was an accident, we're not going to cause a lot of loss of life. But it also needed to be close enough to settlements because you needed a workforce. And this plant had, you know, probably at its highest about 20 employees, but usually kept about 12 to 15 people working constantly during the time it was there. They also needed water power because at that time most things were powered by water. And so Chittenango Creek provided an opportunity for them to create a dam, to create sluiceways, to bring water, to operate these barrels that turned around and all of the presses that worked and all of those things. So Chittenango Creek had pretty good flow. And prior to this mill going there, there was already a small development at that location. There was the Seymour grist mill and the Seymour lumber mill, sawmill there. And today, if you, again, travel down East Road as you're coming down the hill and right before you get to the creek, the Seymour house is on the right-hand side and the barn that's there are original to that property. They were the Seymour family. Currently, the family still has property on the west side of the road that remains with, you know, the family today. And again, as you get onto the bridge, if you look to your right, both sides of that creek, you can see the old stone foundations that are still there from the grist mill and the sawmill. So they had a mill pond that was down there. So I think that you know, Colonel Griswold thought that that was a, you know, not a bad site to be. One other thing is that they needed transportation. Once you got this stuff into these metal kegs, you know, they're heavy. You didn't want to, you know, draw these very far, only one or two at a time, so you needed to get things. New Woodstock was approximately 2 miles to the train station, where the depot is there today. Cazenovia was only 3 miles away, but about 1.25 miles up the road, where Belina Road crosses East Lake Road, there was another train station. New Woodstock was served by the Lehigh Valley Railroad, running from Canastota all the way into Pennsylvania. The road coming, or the train coming across the Belina Road was the West Shore Railroad. Came from Syracuse down along the west side of Cazenovia, Lake, crossed down across Route 13, Rippleton Crossroads, and into Belina. So they were able to go in either direction and drop that off. When the New Woodstock residents used to complain about this very highly explosive product being drugged through the middle of their town, they would complain, you know, to some degree, and so what they would do is go onto Delphi Road where the train tracks crossed, and there was a flag stop, so they could wave their flag and stop the train, put their product on, move on, didn't irritate the people of New Woodstock. So it was a great site from the standpoint that it had everything that they needed. And I mean, I guess I don't know what property cost back in those days, but $1,500 for 45 acres isn't bad. I think we'd all pay that today and be very happy. So, you know, that was great. So with having all those things there and having the Seymour sawmill there, it's not documented anywhere, but I would assume that probably a lot of the lumber used to construct those buildings were probably sawn right there and used and just moved, you know, right up the road and built all their buildings. So Griswold probably wasn't as well-heeled as he thought he was, because when it came time to actually start this particular plant, he had to borrow the princely sum of $3,000 from the Laughlin and Rand Gunpowder Company of New York to help construct his mill. And just a little bit of history about the Laughlin Company. This company was started by a gentleman by the name of Matthew Laughlin. He was an Irish immigrant that moved to Massachusetts. He was there prior to the Revolutionary War. And he started a company that provided potassium nitrate to the Massachusetts militia. And if you go back what we talked about the gunpowder, that's one of the key ingredients of making gunpowder. So he produced that, sold it to the militia during the Revolutionary War. After the war, the Laughlins opened a gunpowder mill in Massachusetts and then further expanded their business into New York and as far as Wisconsin. And so they became, you know, a very large supplier of gunpowder and supplied the Union troops with gunpowder during the Civil War. So I'm kind of building on this fact that some of the, you know, these small communities kind of grow out, and we'll get back to that in a second. In July of 1888, the powder mill was completed. It was not a huge industrial complex that we would think of today in thinking of big manufacturing. You know, like we can all think back to the days of, you know, Bristol Labs and all those places and how big those are for producing things. Well, this was rather small. It was a complex of about 16 small wooden buildings that sat next to a mill race, and a larger magazine that was up the road further and across the street, you know, for the storage of their finished product. There was a dam that was constructed to divert part of Chittenango Creek to supply that water for all those materials and for their you know, machinery to operate. And so once this was up, everybody seemed to be fine. By all accounts, you know, some of the verbal comments that were made, people were happy to work there. He was a good employer. He took care of people when they did get injured in some kind of, you know, mishap. But I mean, generally, the plant operated well. He supplied Laughlin and Rand with, you know, gunpowder, and that's when, at that particular point in time, that was they were the second largest producer of gunpowder in the United States. So there was a pretty good relationship between the Belmont Mill and Laughlin and Rand, besides the fact that Mr. Griswold owed him $3,000. So that was another reason to kind of stick in there. So, by all accounts, the mill ran smoothly from 1888 until 1895. At this time, you know, we don't know why, but Colonel Griswold began borrowing money. He borrowed $12,000 from a family in Auburn. And at the same time, he turned around and entered into an agreement with the Laughlin and Rand Powder Company to rent his mill, all the land, all of the buildings, everything that went with it, for $2,500 a year for 10 years. Colonel Griswold decided that he would stay on and manage that plant for Laughlin and Rand, so everything was pretty much the same, other than he was just collecting rent and getting paid a salary and not, you know, reaping the benefits of selling his product. But on the evening of July 19th, 1897, at 11 p.m. at night, there was a terrific explosion, as we can all imagine from fireworks, and you know what we see today, fireworks places go up, and it's quite a show. As quoted in the Casanova Republican, Colonel Griswold could hear at his home and knew exactly what had happened. He picked up the local doctor, whose name was Dr. Joy, and some medical supplies, and he proceeded to the mill. Fortunately, no one was injured. But now they had to try to figure out, why did this thing blow up? Was it disgruntled employee? Was it, you know, misstorage of things? You know, what was it? And it had been a clear night. It was you know, moon was out, everything was there. There were no thunderstorms like we had tonight that may have caused a natural explosion to help this stuff go off. And, you know, they found that the one building that blew up was the furthest one from the road. It also had quite a large amount of gunpowder in there. And by all accounts, it was 2 tons. So that gave quite a shock, you know, around. And again, it was reported that it rattled windows. And this was a gentleman that lived on number 9 road. Inn, which coming south out of Cazenovia kind of heads over to Belina Road and towards Aryaville. So we're several miles away from the site. It rattled this man's windows, and he said that it actually concussed his bed and that he turned a complete somersault. So, you know, we can only assume that this was a lark boom. Also, they found a 10-pound piece of steel 1,700 feet away from the site that ended up in somebody's yard. So this was a large explosion, and it also probably set this company back quite a bit. But at that time, Laughlin and Rand sent their inspectors up, visited the site, and determined that the damage was not severe enough to abandon the mill. So repairs began, and by February of 1898, the mill was back in production, producing 160 kegs of powder a day. You know, I don't know what to compare that to, but to me, with the process that they use, that seems like quite a lot. So, you know, this was a valuable plant. And so once this mill was back up and going, everything must have been going okay because, again, the Republican reported that Colonel Griswold was, you know, making improvements to his home and adding some more things to his outbuildings around the house. So, I mean, most of us, when we feel good and we have a little extra money, we do things like that. So things must have been okay. But in June of 1898, there was an announcement that the mill was suspending operations and dismissed the entire workforce. You know, it was a bit odd. No clue to this unusual action appeared, and some say that actually it may have had something to do with the Spanish-American War, but there is no record to why. And during this period, we were in the midst of the Spanish-American War. You know, Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Riders, you know, it invaded Cuba, and, you know, we were fighting a war. But you would think it would be the other way, that people would, you know, we would be supplying more gunpowder. But for some reason, the company just shut that plant down. And, you know, the mill did reopen on October 3rd of 1898. It was open for 4 days. And on October 7th of 1898 at 5:57, just about an hour after this, you know, plant had closed for the day, there was another large explosion, and this time it destroyed 4 buildings, and there were 2 separate explosions that were heard by neighboring people. The noise from this one was heard as far away as Hamilton, New York. So, I don't know, I know from New Woodstock it's probably a good 20-25 miles over there, so that's quite a loud noise. I know sound travels, but over all those hills, that's quite a thing. So, several of the mixers were destroyed, as well as the very heavy, you know, large hydraulic press. So this time, it was reported that it was going to take more than $10,000 to repair the plant. And Laughlin and Land thought that there was going to be too much of an investment for them to rebuild the plant and get it back into production. So they decided to cut their losses and said, that's it. They walked away. The Cazenovia Republican reported that no decision was made about rebuilding publicly, but the neighbors wished it wouldn't, and of course it never was. So the Griswolds themselves, now without a mill, without a job, still continued to live in Cazenovia. They lived there until March of 1903. Then the home was sold to Dr. J.M. Joy. Hence the name Joy Hall today, because he was the owner for many years until the college bought it from them when it was Cazenovia Seminary. And then the mill was sold to a Charles Fox of New Woodstock for that same $1,500 that Colonel Griswold paid for it. So at least he made out okay there. He didn't depreciate, but it didn't amortize either. But so just a quick look back to talk about Laughlin and Rand Powder Company. By the turn of the century, in 1900, Laughlin and Rand and another company. How many people here have heard of DuPont? Well, DuPont was at that time, between Laughlin and Rand and the DuPont Corporation, they controlled 2/3 of the country's explosive and military ammunitions production. So they were both big companies. And so there were still smaller companies, you know, that existed, but these guys were the big players. There was a battle between the owners of Laughlin and Rand and the DuPont family. These were second generation DuPonts. Laughlin and Rand really wanted to buy DuPont, but the family members would not let that go. So they bought out Laughlin and Rand. Laughlin and Rand became part of DuPont. So we do that lineage that right there in Little New Woodstock, halfway between Casanova and New Woodstock, that powder mill was part of what is now the DuPont Corporation. So, that's how we tie these things all together. So as I said, the ties that bind us can be rather large. Again, now we just, go to a couple of slides. This is a kind of a hand-drawn map. It's the best that we have. There are really no photographs that specifically show these sites. New Woodstock is down this way. This is East Road, and it turns here. This is Judd Road heading to the transfer station. This is the Seymour House and the Seymour Barn. This is the grist mill foundation. There's a sawmill foundation just built in over here. This was a huge mill pond, Chittenango Creek running here. Mill pond that they used for their operations. This is the milling farm right here, and this is back up again Chittenango Creek coming from towards Aryville back this way. They dammed this all up and brought their water into all these buildings. So those 16 buildings that I talked about all kind of fall into this area. Today, if you drive by, this building right there is the Millen Farmhouse. That farmhouse was the foreman's house during the operation of the mill. So that is the one building that still stands today from that entire plant. Up here, if you go past that farm, the road makes a turn. That's where the magazine was. On the back table over there are some larger pictures that we have. We'll show some here that you can take a look at afterwards that do show these, various buildings. Okay, these again are just some pictures that were taken across from the mill pond up on the side hill. And again, today there are trees all over the side hills. But back in the day, of course, I'm sure the same was here in this area. Settlers came in, we cut everything down. We needed it for firewood, we needed it to build buildings, etc. We needed farm fields. So, a lot of that looks a little bit different. But these were the size of those buildings, and the various operations of the powder mill took place there. Again, some more of those buildings, bringing the various operations back down, doing, this was probably a drying room with a smokestack that dried that powder. These were the kegs that were used, the powder was put in, and that's how they would be shipped, again, down on that same site with a lot of those buildings. This was the powder magazine, which was a way further up the road and to the west. There is no vestiges of that today, but this was some of the staff and the people who worked there. These are those zinc balls that were used to pulverize the product. You can see there's a quarter. So these were a little bit smaller than a golf ball, I would say. I don't know but they varied in size. And again, the stones that people have found, and I know that the Millens actually have a couple jars of these that they've dug out. The stones are about like this. They're not very good, but they put a lot of them in there, and I guess that would work. And again, these are the resources that we use to help us put this program together. And again, I thank you guys for having us. And if there are any questions, we try to answer them. I don't know if we can do a whole lot, but if anybody has one, I'll try to answer it.
You mentioned a railroad stop.
Yes.
On what railroad track was that?
That was the Lehigh Valley Railroad, but it crosses. You can still see the railroad bed there today on Delphi Road. If you're coming up from Delphi and you cross Route 13 going east, you go down a little dip and it comes up, and that's where the train tracks came from, the Lehigh Valley Railroad.
Okay, so that was not the Syracuse and Western?
No. West Shore Railroad, well, actually, that's if you're going up Route 13 on Rippleton Road, then you can turn right onto Rippleton Crossroads, and it's called Crossroads because that's where the train crossed Rippleton Road at that point. And again, on a good day, you can look, there's still vestiges of the old stone bridge that the trains went across Chittenango Creek on down in there. Any other questions?
Who did you say wrote the Power Mill story that appeared, series that appeared in the CAS? I thought it was Don Hart.
No, our Phil Hart wrote it.
Phil?
Yep.
How would that explosion, or those explosions, compare to the Split Rock explosion?
Boy. You know, I guess I don't have any comparison because not hearing those things, I mean, all I can think is you just think about, you know, take the Revolutionary War and you hear those muskets go off. And I mean, and those are small charges. And you think about 2 tons of this all going off at one time. I would say it's, you know, pretty awesome.
Is it recorded anywhere that people lost their hearing?
No. You know, really, I mean, and again, there are families, Chauncey Holmes, who is related to the Holmes family living in New Woodstock, but he was a geologist living in Tully. And, you know, he did a little bit of stuff where he talked, but nobody's ever talked about any problems with that because every time there was an explosion there, nobody was right there because the help had all gone home. No one was there. So that's why it was always suspicious as to whether, you know, somebody was trying to sabotage this plant, somebody was a disgruntled employee, didn't like what was happening, so, but no, you know, nothing to that. I mean, nobody seems to have come away with any injuries, which is a good thing.
Could you go back to the map, the hand-drawn map that you had?
I can't, Perry, but hopefully my wife can.
There. The road going north to Casanova is what highway as we know it now?
This is East Road, as you would know it today.
And the road going to New Woodstock?
This is still, East Road continues down to 4 corners, and that intersects with Thompson Road and Delphi Road and makes a bend right into New Woodstock until it hits Route 13.
So is that north?
This would be, yeah, this is north going this way, here.
So East Road is really going south.
There's a lot of twists and turns to it. Yeah, if you look on your car, you know, when you're driving down it, yeah, you change quite a bit, so.
If you're not careful, you don't get to Casanova, you go off to the left.
That is correct.
So the thing that's labeled canal is really a mill run?
This was a, you know, from this mill pond, that's how they took the water to
Carry them
to bring it to all their various buildings that they needed power to.
Interesting, yeah. Wow, that's a long mill run.
Well, you figure, I mean, 16 buildings and all separated from each other because they wanted them somewhat separated because of the explosions. I mean, you think, you know, originally this would have been the first one that blew up. And so they still had all the rest of the factory was still there, so to speak, instead of one large building when everything could have been just, you know, devastated. And again, you know, I think that Colonel Griswold's original pairing with Laughlin and Rand, you know, and even just borrowing the money to build this facility, I think they must have lent some technology to him because these guys were big players even in that time, you know, after the Civil War. So, I mean, they must have known exactly what they were doing, at least to some degree. And it's a, you know, it's a volatile industry.
What buildings are there by 1 and 2?
These buildings right here, this was the Seymour family complex, and the Seymour family's home and their barn, and then they operated a sawmill and a grist mill right here. And you can still, if you drive slowly across the bridge, you can see the stone foundation right there in the creek.
So it's a yellow house there where number 1 is.
Yeah.
So
You know, you
it
go down
wasn't
that-
part of the.
It wasn't part of the powder mill, no. No, they were, the Seymour family was there first, and then these guys, you know, came in and built afterwards.
Was there more of a settlement called Belmont? Were there other families in that hamlet?
There were, but it was actually a little further away. When you got up in here, there were some houses in this area here, back in here, and a few more that were further up around the corner. But it really wasn't even a hamlet as we know them today.
There was a one-room schoolhouse.
Yeah, that
So
on
they're obviously.
Judd Road right here. It's house owned. Today, it has a marker out in front of it. That was a one-room schoolhouse. So a lot of the people from that area attended school there. And it, just a sidebar, I'll plug my wife for this, but if any of you during the months of May and June, so this year it's over, but if you happen to be going by the Lorenzo Schoolhouse here on Route 13, my wife is the director of education for Lorenzo, but she's the school marm. And so they'd love to have people stop in, and kids come from fourth grades, they dress in the 1890s period of school and go there for an immersion day. So it's always, if you want a good laugh, stop by and see those guys. Right on Route 13, it's part of Lorenzo.
We call it Rippleton Road. Yes. It's right next to the Empire Brewery now.
Yeah.
I've taken my tanker through
Yeah.
lunchtime.
Teach the children how to do that, right?
No, not for them, it's for me.
Any other questions?
East Road is west of Route 13 or east of Route 13?
East of Route 13. Yeah. Sure. The best way is to come, if you're coming from this direction, take Route 80 over. And when it runs in at the caution light into Woodstock, drive straight through. And it'll be, in East Road is actually your second right or left-hand turn. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isn't it called Mill Street?
Yeah, it's Mill Street in town and it turns to East Road. I can't tell you what the county route number, I mean, I've lived there all my life and I still can't tell you. Yes.
So that's not with the homes and
That part of that, the Holmes family, yes, in their lineage. Mm-hmm. Yes. If there are no more questions, I'll put in one shameless plug for the New Woodstock Historical Society. On August 15th at our regular meeting, if any of you have not heard about the Loomis Gang, Sue Greenhagen from Morrisville is coming to do a presentation on the Loomis Gang. So you're certainly welcome to come. We hold our meetings at the church right there in the Woodstock, and their meetings are at 7 o'clock right here, so feel free to stop by. And again, thank you for having us. I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it.